Welcome to the final episode of Uncharted HR, Inclusive E-HRM. I'm Dr. Robin Ludwig, and today I'm joined by Dr. Doug Walkman as we wrap up our six-part journey exploring how digital HR tools can help build more inclusive, connected workplaces. Over the past 5 episodes, we've unpacked inclusive practices across recruitment, learning and development, work management, performance management, and people analytics. We've heard how inclusive job descriptions and transparent recruitment systems can attract diverse talent and how tailored learning pathways and universal design principles can support growth and how fair recognition and ethical data use can transform workplace culture. But today, we are shifting the spotlight to a group often overlooked in HR conversations, non-HR managers, or in simple terms, people managers. These are the people leading teams, shaping day-to-day experiences, and feeding critical data into E-HRM systems. So what does inclusive leadership look like in a digital HR environment? How can managers contribute meaningful to inclusive E-HRM without formal HR training? And what does the future hold for the inclusive leadership in tech-driven workplaces? So overall, what is the HR role for the non-HR manager in relation to the digital work environment to strengthen the people perspective? We also explore how organizations can foster collaboration between HR, line managers, and other organizational areas, and share practical guidance for managers just beginning their inclusive E-HRM journey. So, whether you're a team leader, a project manager, or simply curious about the future of work, this episode is for you. So grab your logbook, settle in, and let's chart into new territory together. This is Uncharted HR, and today we are exploring the vital role of people managers for the future of inclusive E-HRM. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you, Robin.
I want to start this time slightly different with some reflections from previous 5 episodes and the amazing guest speakers we had on the Uncharted HR podcast. I want to start by taking apart the topic of this mini-series, Inclusive E-HRM. I've been recently at a keynote speaker from the SAGE conference. I'm talking about Science Australia Gender Equity, where Professor Sandy O'Sullivan gave an amazing speech regarding breaking silos and working together for equity. And they made really clear that inclusion can actually be a quite restrictive space, in the sense of it's a closed-off space. This is when we achieved inclusion. That's it. That's a final state and space where we try to get everybody on board and invited. But that's also why I always advocate that inclusion is not so much a state we try to achieve in the workplace, but it's more a call for action to move forward and appreciate the diversity we have to enable equity and equality in the workplace. On the other hand, we had also really interesting conversations with, for instance, Joel about why do we say E-HRM? And he was kind of like advocating for we should call it AI HRM. So why do we actually need to include the electronic at the beginning? And I pretty much took away, I think it's important at the moment to highlight that for the transformative state we are in human resource management, also relating how you phrase it, looking forward to a digital work environment. So that's why we also in human resource management have to adapt to it and maybe call it out throughout this transition. But I think like over time, it will actually resolve and we are back to just HRM. And also then shift from seeing human resource management as an admin task in the organization, supporting purely operational and functional tasks, which can be potentially easily be supported by AI and technology, to a more strategic perspective, which definitely needs the human in the loop. So I guess some of the characteristics that we as managers or HR professionals should take away is having humility overall, but also being open to getting it wrong because we are in this transition phase and learning new aspects. So One component which came up through the conversations was around managers in various different forms. I would be really interested to hear from you, Doug. What role do people or the relationship between people play in a scenario of the digital workplace?
Thank you, Robin. I was reflecting while you were speaking about someone of my generation and how much change of a transformational nature we've actually seen. If I were to find a book on a character that no longer exists, it was called The Tea Lady. So organizations have transformed themselves as a consequence of technological change over time. But never before have we been challenged to think through the implications for the relationship between people, be it a line manager and a subordinate, be it a self-managing team, or be it the organization as a whole. We've got a lot of tools already, but some of those are indicating inappropriate use. So screening applicants on the basis of certain characteristics that then change the equity of the selection process is something that's done for one reason, but at the detriment of another. So the values of the organization might be compromised as a consequence of something being really efficient. That's not to say that every transformational stage that organizations have gone through in the last 30 or 40 years haven't thrown up the same kinds of problems. But from where I sit, I'm confronted by the issue of the nexus between inclusion and the digital environment, not having thought about it. And yet I experience it almost every day because I are working in environments where many of the processes around the management of people have been digitized because the productivity gain has always been around the transactional aspects. But now it's creeping into more of the work around judgment, more of the work that should engage face-to-face interaction, not just person-to-computer interaction. And one wonders whether there's a greater requirement for the line manager to appreciate the significance of the impact on the employment relationship. When we look at the employment relationship, we can look at it at three different levels. And I think it's important if we stand back from this thing, first of all, and say, well, what is the employment relationship about? And it's about obligations and expectations. It's often not written down because if it were, it wouldn't be a psychological contract between people. And because it's not written down, it can be frequently breached or broken. And it can impact on employee well-being, on productivity, on satisfaction, on engagement. And at the end of the day, it might be one of the key dimensions about why people leave organizations. That relationship needs to be sustained over time. And it requires interaction, observation, reflection, a measure of trust. So I guess what I'm saying is that as we step further into the digital world, we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of the skills involved on both parties, of the importance of continuous dialogue. But I think that point is that this is the foundation stone that everything else depends on. And we can't have effective inclusion without effective inclusive leadership. But we also can't have it if both parties aren't bringing a predisposition to make it work in this environment. Because what we could see possibly happening in some situations is the individual emerges as opposed to the relationship between individuals or the team and the collaboration within the team. A high-performance work system generates incentives that actually leads to that kind of behavior. And I don't think that's where we want to end up.
Really like your perspective on employee relationships. And I'm curious about to hear your perspective, what it actually means when we're saying managing for engagement. Do you have a perspective on that one?
I've done some work a couple of years ago that made it very clear that the problem that the organization was facing was the lack of the ability of the leader to effectively manage the total requirements of the team. It got to such a problem that the organization had to go to the board to seek more resources to replace the resources they'd lost, and that their performance, and it was a business continuity issue, had declined to such a level that it was something you couldn't hide. If the relationship between the line manager and employees is so important, then why aren't we building the skills of both sides of the equation as we go forward into digitization of our work processes? We're not doing that. We're not thinking about that. We're thinking about how do we reskill and upskill individual employees, be they in a financial institution or a retail institution. And that's where the focus of the organization is, that I perceive it. We're buying fancy tools to add on to tools that we already have to make our employees more productive. But we're not investing in the relationship within teams and between individuals and line managers. We're not investing in building inclusive leadership capability. We're not even seeing that as something that's a requirement to select people by. It reminds me of organizational citizenship behavior because I researched that as part of my PhD. And the thing that's obvious is you want it, you need it, but you don't select on it and you don't recognize it and reward it. But it's the cohesion within the working relationship of individual employees with each other and between individual employees and the line manager. That ability to collaborate, that ability to recognize and appreciate, that ability to advocate for inclusivity within, and to acknowledge our own vulnerability and take risks. And I'm certainly monocultural oriented. I have only traveled in countries with the same culture and have very limited experience in Southeast Asia, and certainly haven't worked there. So those are issues that organizations need to continue to focus on as we pursue the glittering prize. The glittering prize in this instance is productivity. And we see organizations make judgments about how to pursue it without seeing the full implications around how we're going to do it, what we need as skills. Do we do the upskilling first before we embark on the acquisition of the tool? Hell no. All right. And so the only thing that will see us through, the only thing that will sustain us will be focusing continuously on that relationship, and managing for engagement is part of that process. It's about understanding people as individuals. It's about the cohesiveness and synergy of differences that people bring together. It's about continuous dialogue. It's about collaboration and innovation and creativity. It's about building capabilities purposefully.
Thanks, Doug. There was so much in it. And I think a couple of points that I would like to pick up is definitely being aware that most of the conversations we have on this podcast are in the context of the global north. And there is definitely also a complete difference for organizations who working in international or multinational context, including the global south. So thank you for raising that. And I think that's already one of the really important aspects regarding self-awareness when it comes to capability building of inclusive leadership. And you mentioned inclusive leadership as an important role to play when it comes to employee engagement, managing, and also adapting to the new normal and technology or digital transition we have in the workplace. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What do we understand about inclusive leadership so far?
There's two sides to that equation. One is, what difference does it make? And the other is, well, what are the traits or characteristics of inclusive leadership? And the one thing that we take from the research is that there isn't one map or one set of characteristics or one framework. There are many. And my personal view is it doesn't matter which framework that you pick up. Utilize it and adapt it to the organizational context, and use it at a personal level in terms of greater awareness about what does the research tell us are the characteristics of effective inclusive leadership. And learn from others as well, because there are people who are naturally good at this, and that becomes a way of not just seeing them as role models, but learning how they acquired that acquisition. It could well be that this is a storytelling networking event of the future where people bring their own journey of developing inclusiveness capability. And we see, in fact, that there's not a single pathway. I have yet to see the research about an organization that implements this in an effective way. And I'm sure the research is there. I just haven't seen it. But I don't think we should be concerned with the different frameworks, because what it means is that this area of thought is emerging. And I think the fact that it's now rich enough to present a number of different frameworks. The other thing is that there's a lot of evidence about the positivity of inclusive leadership. It's one of the most important antecedents. Now, the characteristics of individual employees and their predisposition is obviously important as well. And the organizational culture and climate, and how we perhaps embed questions about how well we're doing in this area of our capability building might be something that the future can lead to. And I think I'd like to see inclusiveness and inclusive leadership on the agenda for this kind of organization, because in a way, we're role modeling and we're demonstrating our commitment, and we might become an exemplar within our industry sector. And the same thing is true, I think. We have diversity at a very high level of governance now, but I don't think that inclusiveness has the same, kind of nous, the same kind of credibility, the same kind of significance and importance, that it should be something that we're specifically looking for at the senior levels of an organization.
Like your first point that you made around sometimes overthinking or even the theory stands in the way of progress, doesn't it? If you kind of like try to find the best model and just read and do research instead of like, okay, sometimes you just have to jump into it, give it a go, because depending on your context, depending on your organization and your people, you need to find your own way, and it can only be so far informed from the literature or research out there. I want to extend one aspect around capability building when it comes to managers and inclusive leadership, thinking about how can people manage or contribute to inclusive E-HRM without formal human resource management training. For instance, when it comes in relation to ethics in the digital environment.
I think that is a work in progress, because I think that the whole issue of business ethics is under-recognized, not in our professional body's framework, but largely, I had a student do some research in this area in terms of education in the university sector, and there is very patchy application of it. So I think the ethical issues around the digital environment are certainly a field of study, but whether it actually influences the way ethics is perceived in the organization. We know that ethical dilemmas in the management of people is a significant issue. There's a body of research that demonstrates the significance of it, but it needs to be encompassing of the digital environment. And at the moment, I see them as distinct. And I think that there's an opportunity, and that becomes perhaps an area of research and then practical application where we bring those two things together.
Can you maybe ponder on for a moment longer about why you do see these two things as distinct?
I have students that are researching at the moment, and it's quite clear that they see them as distinct. Often ethics is perceived as part of AI, or ethical dilemmas as part of HRM. But in terms of a distinct field with the two things together, I mean, I'm going to wait and see what I get, but that's the position that I see the literature in at the moment, that it's about bringing the ethics of AI and the digital environment more into perspective when we talk about the implications for inclusivity, rather than fraud, corruption, maladministration, inappropriate access to, the privacy issues, the kinds of things that governance of organizations concerns itself, rather than the impact on individuals and teams and the organization as a whole in terms of how we manage people. An understanding of the organization, its values and behaviors, is not what it says, but what it does. And the way it treats you through the process of selection and onboarding, and then how it manages you. It's not about what its, employee value proposition is. It's about the way you're treated on a day-to-day basis, and that often comes down to the relationship between the employee and the line manager. I'm awakened now to the importance of this being at the center of effective talent management. It's not a peripheral issue. The next step, of course, is to ensure that we understand what are the capabilities that effective line managers have to have in order to manage people well. Are we going to build the capabilities along the way to ensure that not only people can transform themselves to fit into the new environment, but the kind of fundamentals about the relationship of people is actually got to be transformed as well. We've got to heighten the awareness of line managers about the roles that they play in relation to the E-HRM, because they do play a role in it. The degree to which they're consulted and collaborate with others as stakeholders in the transformational process. And then sensitized not only to the capabilities around inclusive leadership, but what you need to do more of because of the context that you're working in. Because this is just a contextual factor. I think that there is a begrudging acceptance of its reality, but not a full embracement of it. And that would be across industry sectors. And that's just a small thing about the digitized environment. And then the tools that we have access to or will have access to.
I think that's a really important point you make there. Do we see the technology as a tool or as a service? And is linked also to the fear of replacing people's job? Because if we see AI or other technology as a service, then it can do the work for us and potentially, yes, replaces the human to do it. But if we actually use it as a tool, so for instance, how can we make this digital meeting more accessible? Such things like beautiful closed caption, turning it on, live captions while we have the remote meeting, which is supported for a diverse range of people to actually engage in the meeting more meaningful. But also how can, as you said, managers use these technology tools to actually strengthen the relationship they have with the employee and the role they play in the overall organization. Another point that I wanted to pick up based on what you were mentioning is it's not just a relationship between the manager and the employee, but it's also the relationship between HR, the manager, and other departments, specifically now in these more digitalized and complex workplaces. So can you think of any opportunities how to actually foster collaborations between starting with HR and managers and also other organizational departments?
I think to some extent we've got to ensure that the people that are working at the center in HR understand the importance of stakeholder management, and that goes a bit beyond having strategic business partners. It actually goes to ensuring that you value authentically the contribution that the line managers, be wherever they are, frontline supervisor, team leader, as opposed to the way it happens now. It's position-based and it's fairly narrow. And information goes down if you have a need to know, and the consultation goes up. And I think, put aside the town hall type mechanism, I think that HR needs to revisit, frankly, the way that it consults and manages stakeholder relationships. I'm not saying they're not doing it, and I'm not saying some aspects of it don't work really well, but I think that as we transform, it seems to me that a lot of the digital tools change overnight, and there's very little guidance about how you interface with the new bit. So it really is an investment in terms of the sustainability and of our ability to manage change moving forward. Sometimes we don't have the luxury of doing things the way we would like to do them because the mandate for change, the pace of change is so imperative that organizations forget about some of the niceties. And so I think this is a mixed bag. It's a bit messy in part, and I'm not sure the extent to which we're looking at the way this is being managed in other organizations to take the exemplars and the characteristics of that. But there's so much literature around effective change that you wonder why it doesn't get applied.
I think that's a really relevant point. The urgency of change management and being capable of leading or having knowledge and capabilities in the area of change management becomes also a vital capability for human resource professionals, but also I think for everyday managers, independent of a people focus or not.
At a personal level, I want to acknowledge that I come forward as a learner and that I've been confronted by the relationship between inclusive leadership, which I thought I understood, and the role of the non-HR line manager. But I hadn't seen it starkly enough in the context of the digital environment in which we're working now and we perceive changing rapidly. Secondly, that it's a reflective conversation. And so what I'm encouraging to do is to reflect on their own experience and their own situation and their learning experience that's going on and see how do they rate this? Is this, number one? Is this the top priority? Is this something that you need to know more about? Is this relevant to your working context or your future working role? Is this something that you want to be able to advocate for yourself, to promote yourself in an employability context? I think that it's not just a question of listening. I think it's a question of reflecting critically and then seeing whether, like me, your perspective of it is shifted. And so that means that it's actually a critical, reflective conversation that's going on within you. And then you might then do something about it, learn more about it.
Thank you. And that's a nice frame back to what I mentioned at the beginning. And you, the perfect role model, because humility is so important to understand what we don't know and being open about learning new things, gaining new insights, being open for the conversations, being uncomfortable and reflecting on why we are maybe uncomfortable with some insights or situations, and moving on from there, developing actions and initiatives that help us grow as the person and professionals we have a slight closing we have a slight closing tradition where I asked each of the guests a final curiosity question for mapping unexplored territories in HR. And the question I have for you is, how can people managers actively support employee well-being in today's increasing digital workplace?
I think that we're back to talking about inclusive leadership. We're talking about understanding the uniqueness of the individual. This is the universalized approach to teaching and learning as well. It's about understanding our own vulnerabilities and our work colleagues. I think it's trying to be adaptive. It's trying to be responsive. It's trying to be better at active listening than speaking. And I would never see myself as a role model in that regard. It's a question of being reflective about what's working and what's not working and to learn from that experience and adapt accordingly. They're the things that the performative environment doesn't value enough. They're the things that individually, from an authentic personal value perspective, we should carry with us. And with me, it's always a struggle. There's the little me and the big me, and I constantly get that one wrong. But this has been not only a challenge at an individual personal level for me, it's been a kind of cathartic experience to realize that something that I thought I knew, I only knew in part. And it's also, I think, empowered me to carry that message in my interactions with people that I work with, but also the students that I work with. And I think that's a real significant takeaway.
So sometimes being slightly uncomfortable, challenged, being stretched, being maybe even tested can be actually really helpful for a healthy development and relating to employee well-being in a more holistic perspective of employee well-being, if that makes sense.
I think that this is a really complex and challenging area of people management. And while employee well-being is certainly up on the radar, the means by which leaders are equipped to support adequately. And it's kind of like mental health training, where you need to recognize the characteristics where well-being doesn't exist and advocate and support people to get professional advice, but not to provide that yourself. But you also need to recognize that the way in which you manage people and the relationship between you and the people you manage can have a positive or a detrimental effect on their well-being. And that well-being is a multidimensional thing, and it transcends work. And so there's a lot of things that get in the mix. I think those fundamentals become the cornerstone of sustainable, capable business systems in contemporary organizations where there's this churn, this transformational churn around the infrastructure, the technology, the tools. And so how you deal with it at the individual level and at the work unit level is very much in the province of the individual line manager. No one's prescribing how you should do that. No one's looking over your shoulder about how you do that well. But they'll be able to judge the consequences of whether you're doing it and whether you're doing it well in relation to the retention of talent, in terms of the engagement of talent, in terms of the advancement. Hey, we should take credit when the people that work with us then go on and get recognized elsewhere within our organization or outside it. I recall reading that it should be a signature role of the effective line manager that everyone within the team is being built to a point where they can leave. And we should stop being preoccupied with the metric, but make sure that business continuity doesn't suffer and that staff morale doesn't suffer. And I think that's a whole different ballgame, because we've got 5 generations in the workplace at the moment. And if we think that all of them want the same things, well, yeah, there are similarities, but there are some distinct differences. And so the harmonization of that becomes a really major challenge when we talk about inclusivity, because who are we talking about? What's the diversity we're talking about? What are the vulnerabilities that exist within our individual employees and ourselves? And do we dare share what we don't know and are learning to cope with? Not the way I see it. We've all got dozens of masks on in the work environment, and nobody's prepared to adequately share and to be recognized for that. We'll go back to organizational citizenship behavior, and inclusive leadership have a lot in common, but one deals with the employees themselves and the other deals with the people who effectively manage them. And so to what extent does an inclusive leader foster and advocate for that kind of capability within the team? Well, it suggests that they do, because it suggests that inclusive leaders are advocates and promoters at the organizational level. And that was a new one for me. I saw it very much at the individual employee and the work unit. But no, we need them to be standing up and being counted and assisting. That could be collaboration, it can be innovation, it can be representation, but ensuring that the organization is being shaped in the way that it manages people and values people, and that will benefit the organization as it moves forward in this transformative digital world.
One of the early comments you made, I think how I interpreted it is, let's go back to the basics. So with all the change we have in a digital work environment, the application of electronic human resource management, plugging in AI and automation, but we need to come back to the basics in the sense of personal reflection, critical thinking, connecting and listening to the other people in the workplace, to then find ways of collaboration and support. And it doesn't mean like we can't use tools such as technology to support us in these processes, but it's coming again back to fundamental capabilities we all should bring to the workplace. That brings us to the end of our final episode of Uncharted HR, Inclusive E-HRM. A huge thank you to Dr. Doug Jackman for joining me today and sharing such thoughtful insights into the evolving role of non-HR managers in shaping inclusive workplaces. Across the series, we've explored how digital HR tools, when designed and used inclusively, can transform recruitment, learning, reward, performance, and analytics. But as we've heard today, the real power of inclusive E-HRM lies in collaboration. It's not just about HR systems, it's about people. And non-HR managers play a vital role in making those systems meaningful, ethical, and human. Whether you are leading a team, designing a workforce or workflow, or simply curious about the future of work, we hope the series has sparked new ideas and encouraged you to take action. Inclusion isn't a checkbox, it's a mindset, and every manager, regardless of title, can lead with empathy, curiosity, and courage. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found value in today's episode, share it with your colleagues, other learners, or fellow change makers. Connect with me, share your thoughts, and let's keep building capabilities together. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the uncharted territories of